George Strait had everything: the fame, the money, the respect every country artist dreams of. But while others chased cameras, interviews, and headlines, he did the opposite. He disappeared. For decades, George Strait avoided the spotlight so carefully that people stopped asking why. No scandals, no public breakdowns, no dramatic interviews, just silence. And that silence wasn't random. It wasn't shyness, and it definitely wasn't coincidence, because behind that calm image was a decision shaped by loss, control, and a fear most fans never noticed. A choice that protected his career, but may have cost him something far deeper. And once you understand why George Strait stayed distant for so long, you'll never hear his songs the same way again. But listen to this. That's only the beginning. George Strait didn't become a legend by playing the same game as everyone else. While other country stars chased television appearances, magazine covers, and Hollywood deals, George quietly stepped back. Not because he couldn't get them, but because he didn't want them. From early on, he avoided interviews. He skipped award show speeches. He rarely explained himself. And that confused people. In an industry built on personality, George Strait gave almost nothing away. No oversharing, no public drama, no emotional confessions. Fans saw the hat, the calm voice, the flawless performances, but never the man behind them. Some called it discipline. Others called it arrogance. A few insiders whispered that he was hiding something. But here's the truth most people missed. George wasn't running from fame. He was controlling it. He watched what attention did to other artists. Careers destroyed, families fractured. Private pain turned into public spectacle. And instead of testing his limits, he drew a line early and refused to cross it. No tabloids, no chaos, no access. But that kind of control comes with a cost. Because the more George protected his privacy, the more distant he appeared. Fans felt it. Journalists noticed it. Even people close to him sensed a wall that never came down, and that wall only grew higher over time. But that's not all. Because there was one moment, one devastating shift, that turned George Strait's quiet nature into complete withdrawal. And once that happened, nothing about his life felt the same again. For years, George Strait believed control could protect him. Control over fame, control over access, control over his private life. But there's one thing no amount of discipline can stop: loss. In the mid-1980s, George's world collapsed in a way few fans truly understood. A tragedy struck his family, sudden, brutal, and irreversible. And unlike the stories told on stage, this wasn't something he could sing his way through. He didn't talk about it. He didn't explain it. He didn't ask for sympathy. He went quiet. Those close to him noticed the change immediately. The calm presence was still there, but something behind his eyes was gone. Performances became more precise, more controlled, almost too perfect. It wasn't grief on display. It was grief locked away. Most artists would have disappeared completely. Others would have turned the pain into headlines. George did neither. He kept touring, kept recording, kept showing up. But something had shifted. The distance people felt before, now it felt intentional. George stopped letting anyone get close enough to ask real questions. Interviews became rare. Personal topics became off-limits. The spotlight, once merely avoided, now felt dangerous, and the silence grew heavier. Because when someone loses what mattered most, protecting what remains becomes an obsession. Fame stopped being an opportunity. Attention became a threat. And listen to this. That loss didn't just change his personal life, it reshaped every decision he made after. But that leads to an even bigger question. If George Strait was still selling out arenas, why did he seem more withdrawn than ever? Because what came next made that silence permanent. After the loss, George Strait didn't fall apart. He tightened everything. Every appearance was calculated. Every word was measured. Every move followed one rule: stay protected. While other stars opened up, George closed down. He refused deep interviews. He avoided personal questions. He stopped explaining his choices. And to the public, it looked cold. Fans began to notice something strange. The shows were flawless. The vocals steady, the image untouched. But the warmth, it felt distant, almost unreachable. This wasn't arrogance, it was survival. George had learned that attention invites intrusion, and intrusion turns pain into spectacle. So instead of risking another emotional collapse, he built a life based on distance and routine. Tour, perform, disappear. No after parties, no backstage stories, no access. Industry insiders quietly admitted something felt different. George wasn't just avoiding fame anymore, he was avoiding attachment, as if letting people too close might reopen wounds he never allowed to heal, and the more control he kept, the safer he felt. But here's where it gets complicated, because control can protect you, but it can also isolate you. The walls that kept pain out also kept connection away, and over time, George's silence stopped being a shield. It became a prison. But listen to this. That isolation didn't stay behind the scenes. Soon, it would raise questions no one expected. Questions about whether George Strait was still doing this for the love of music, or simply because it was the only place he felt safe anymore. And what happened next only made those doubts louder. By the 1990s, George Strait was everywhere, and nowhere at the same time. He was selling out stadiums, breaking records, dominating country music like no one before him. Yet, the man himself felt farther away than ever. Fans noticed it first. The shows were powerful, but controlled, polished, almost too perfect. There were no emotional speeches, no personal stories, no moments where the mask slipped, just music. Then silence. Reporters tried to get closer. They asked deeper questions. They wanted the man behind the legend, and George responded the same way every time. He shut it down. Interviews became shorter. Appearances became rare. The distance that once felt intentional now felt absolute. People began to wonder if George Strait was still connected to the world around him, or if he had quietly stepped away from it. Some said he was simply private. Others said he was emotionally gone. But listen to this. Even those closest to the industry admitted something had changed. George wasn't just avoiding attention, he was avoiding vulnerability. And that kind of distance has consequences, because when you never let people see your struggles, they start creating their own explanations. Rumors, assumptions, quiet theories that spread without proof. And the more George stayed silent, the louder those questions became. Why did he seem so detached? Why did he never open up? Why did success look so heavy on him? And then came a moment no one expected. A decision that made fans believe George Strait was finally done. Not just with fame, but with the spotlight entirely. But that decision wasn't the end. In fact, it only made the mystery deeper. When George Strait announced his farewell tour, it sent shockwaves through country music. This was supposed to be it, the end of an era, the final goodbye. Fans rushed to see him one last time, tickets vanished, emotions ran high. Everyone believed George was finally walking away, not just from touring, but from the spotlight itself. And on the surface, it made sense. He had nothing left to prove. Every record broken, every milestone reached. But something about that goodbye felt controlled. There were no dramatic speeches, no emotional explanations, no deep reflections about his life or pain, just music. Then, silence. And listen to this. He didn't disappear completely. After the farewell, George returned, quietly, carefully, selectively. No full tours, no media blitz, only appearances on his own terms. That's when fans started asking uncomfortable questions. Was this really retirement, or was it an escape plan? Because if George truly wanted to leave fame behind, he wouldn't keep coming back. But if he stayed too long, the spotlight would demand more than he was willing to give, so he chose something in between. Presence without exposure, success without surrender. Applause without access. But here's the twist. That careful balance only deepened the mystery around him. The more he controlled his visibility, the more people wondered what he was still protecting. And that raises a haunting question. What kind of life forces someone to say goodbye without ever really leaving? Because the reason George Strait couldn't fully walk away was rooted in something far deeper than music. And that brings us to the final piece of the story. By the time George Strait reached his later years, the truth was impossible to ignore. Silence had become his identity. What once protected him now defined him. The distance, the restraint, the refusal to let the world in. Fans admired it, but they also felt it. A man admired by millions, yet deeply unreachable. George never chased legacy. He controlled it. While other artists unraveled publicly, he stayed intact. But staying intact meant carrying everything alone. No interviews to unload the weight, no public confession, no release, just discipline. And listen to this. That kind of silence doesn't come without consequences, because when you never speak about pain, it doesn't disappear. It settles. It hardens. It becomes part of how you move through the world. George chose consistency over exposure, stability over vulnerability, and that decision allowed him to survive an industry that destroyed so many others. But survival isn't the same as freedom. The cost of never breaking down publicly was never being fully known. Not by fans, not by critics, not even by those who thought they understood him. And that is the quiet paradox of George Strait. He won the game without ever playing it the way others did. He kept his dignity. He kept his control. But he also kept his distance. And once silence becomes your shield, removing it feels impossible. Which leaves one final question. Was George Strait protecting his life or protecting himself from it? Because the answer to that question changes how this story truly ends. George Strait didn't fail the spotlight, he escaped it. While others were consumed by fame, he chose silence, control, distance. And that choice saved his career, even if it cost him connection. He gave the world timeless music, but kept his pain out of reach. And maybe that's why his story still feels unfinished, because the greatest mystery about George Strait isn't what he revealed, it's what he never said. If this changed how you see him, leave a comment. And subscribe, because some stories are only understood when you listen closely.